Welcome everyone to Inside Asian Gaming's Trade Talk. My name is Ben Blashke, Managing Editor of Inside Asian Gaming. It's been 3 years now since Vietnam launched a pilot program allowing locals to gamble in 2 selected casinos. Of course, only one of those is open so far, Corona Resort down in Phu Quoc. Last week, of course, though, there were some local media reports that the Ministry of Finance has asked to extend the pilot program by 2 years and to add 2 more casinos to the program located in Da Nang City and Can Hoa Province. What better person to talk about Vietnam than the founder and managing partner of Euro-Pacific Asia Consulting and former president of the Grand Ho Tram in Vietnam, Shaun McCamley. Thanks for joining me, Shaun. How are you?
And good to see you again after all these difficult times we've been facing. And thank you for inviting me along today.
No problem, Shaun. Yeah, definitely great to see the world opening up. And of course, we hope to get back to Vietnam as one of the many places to travel soon. As I said, Shaun, there were reports last week that Vietnam's Ministry of Finance wants to extend a pilot program by 2 years and to add 2 new casinos into the mix. I guess the extension is no great surprise given that COVID has impacted the initial 2-year period. But what about the addition of 2 more casinos, Shaun? What do you think that tells us?
Look, I think it's a very positive story, that the Ministry of Finance, is looking at least to move in this direction. And of course, a lot of us and a lot of the industry are looking at Vietnam as a viable investment opportunity and an alternative, to set up a global and international business. I think that we have to also take into consideration when we hear these stories that there's a lot left of that road to run, because the Ministry of Finance, as powerful as they are, really the real power is with the Politburo. And if the Politburo are not on board, then nothing's going to happen. And unfortunately, as we've seen in the past, the Politburo really is not supportive of gaming or gambling in any form. So I'm hoping that maybe this may be a good indication of things have changed, but I wouldn't be holding my hat on it, to be honest.
So, as I said, Shaun, it's been 3 years since Corona Resort opened, and that signaled the official launch of this pilot program. There were 2 casinos named, but of course, Corona is the only one. Ironic name, I guess, in hindsight too, being called Corona Resort. But of course, that's the only one that's been open through much of this period. Given COVID-19 and the situation, have we learnt much from this first 3 years of this trial?
It's been very difficult to really take a positive overview from there. I look at it from a high level. Really, the government has always been conservative in its approach and its outlook, to gambling and to the provision of gambling to the local population. Corona and Van Dong Province in the north were chosen really particularly because they're quite isolated and difficult, for locals to really get to the properties regularly. It's a 40-minute flight, as you know, from Ho Chi Minh, to Phu Quoc, and then there's a good 40-minute drive from there to the property. And to be honest, it's not a very good drive. I mean, what if it goes past one of the largest rubbish tips on the island? So, so they've, their decisions, in making these 2 locations as their pilot was always going to be, was never going to prove the real value of what bringing locals to the properties can do. But as I've said, and I've said many times, it's a positive step. And I've always said that my feeling is it's you turn on the tap and it's a drip by drip type of process. I think we're still at 2 drips. It's still got a long way to go, I feel, before we can talk about anything opening up. But as I said, I still think it's a good step that the Ministry of Finance have come out with the addition of 2 licenses. Let's hope that gets to 4 drips. But it's very difficult to really analyze the effectiveness, given that only 1 property is actually opened anyway. Van Dong, well, yeah, when is that going to ever happen? Likely not particularly Sun Group now looking at Baja Hills as the option.
Yeah, we've been talking about Bandon for a number of years now, haven't we?
Yeah, yeah.
The two new casinos, Shaun, that have been proposed to be added are located in Da Nang City and on Hon Island in Kanhua Province. Obviously, that second one is by hospitality giant Vinpearl. What do you know about these two developments, and what do you make about them potentially being the next two added to this pilot program?
Well, I think if we look at the first one in Baja Hills, I mean, there's already a very large development there. Sun Group are also one of the biggest real estate developers in Vietnam. And they've already been working with Steelman Group, to draw up a master plan. And that the plan that I was looking at only recently, really sort of details 4 distinct zones. And in one of those zones, it includes a casino facility, actually with a pretty large floor space of around about 8,000 square meters. And they're looking at hotel room capacity of around about 3,000 keys. So, it's a significant property, and Sun Group are recognized as one of the leading groups, in Vietnam in terms of real estate. And, of course, we've been, with the other group, further north. I think, they're the 2 largest groups, along with Vinpearl, that you'll see in Vietnam. So they are very Vietnamese in their ownership, and so I think that is also sends a message, or there is a message coming there from the government that they're prepared to support over anybody else Vietnamese owned businesses, and particularly majority-owned businesses. I mean, forget the fact of partnerships or international partnerships. But I think there's a clear message there where 2 other large properties haven't been mentioned.
Well, that brings me to my next question, actually, Shaun, because Vietnam has spoken often about bringing in foreign investment. We know the minimum investment level over the years for an IR with a casino is $2 billion. You were in charge of one of those properties back when I visited, actually, down at the Grand Ho Tram Strip. Beautiful property, Shaun, but of course, the issues of having no locals gambling continues on to this day. Continuing on from your last comments, I guess, in that last question is, what do we make, not just from the choice of the 2 casinos that may be added to the pilot program, but by the fact that, Ho Tram, Hoiana, other properties have been overlooked?
Yes, I think that is the clear message. From my take and from my understanding of doing business over a number of years in Vietnam, is that clearly the government supports local interests over international companies coming in, and they will always be given the priority and the first the first bite of the cake, so to speak, when they're going to expand these programs out. And it is a shame because, as you said, Ho Tram's a beautiful property. It's a great location. Hoiana, again, is a beautiful property, well sized. It's had significant investment, put into it, and the results have been stunning. I don't think you can describe it any other way. We've all traveled the world, and we've stayed at many, many properties, and it's hard to point a finger and criticize the way that those properties are laid out. The way that they're managed is been exceptional. But it's very, very tough. And I can say that from my own experience. It's a very tough landscape as a foreigner doing business in Vietnam. I used to call dealing with the Vietnamese officials, I used to call it the rubber band mentality that they have, or not that they have, that you have to learn to work with. And what I mean by that is that they are the absolute masters at negotiation. In terms, we'd always get, price rises every month across the board, whether it be water, power, resources. They would always put the prices up every month. And as a responsible manager, and to protect the shareholders' interest, we have to negotiate, with the senior officials for that. But they would stretch the rubber band right until breaking point, and to the point where you just throw your hands up and walk away, and then they would release the band a little bit. And then that the next month you're being for the same process of them stretching this rubber band until it's just to the absolute nth degree. I always thought the Chinese were master negotiators, but really, honestly, the Vietnamese, yes, very, very difficult to deal with as a foreigner.
Absolutely. What are some of the other big challenges, Shaun, from running a foreigner-only casino and a large integrated resort in Vietnam, such as Ho Tram?
One of the biggest problems is money in, money out. The banking system there is very difficult to deal with. It's challenging. It's difficult to work with. So I think from my point of view, when it's difficult to move money in and when it's difficult for players to move their money out, winners checks, for example, or moving funds for winners, you just can't do it. The person themselves has to physically do that themselves. So if you have a person that's won a significant amount of money and you've got to give it to them in cash and they have to move that money out, it's incredibly difficult. So that is a very, very difficult challenge that all operators face. And of course, just dealing with what you have to deal with in visas, with government perception of overseas visitors and tourists, it's quite challenging and not easy.
Do you think the whole foreigner-only model is sustainable?
The foreigner model only is a very, very difficult one to be successful. Really, it's very, very challenging. You need the local market. If you're going to be successful and if you're going to make the business really reach the budgets and reach the objectives, being in a foreigner-only environment, it's very, very hard. And I'd have to say, even harder today, with COVID and with the restrictions that China has placed on their citizens.
So we mentioned earlier, Shaun, that Vietnam has traditionally required a $2 billion investment for foreign companies coming in to get a casino license in their resort. Is this level too high? And what do you think can be done to at least help investors a little bit?
I think we've always said it's too high and unreasonable. I mean, most of the numbers that we talk about are around about the 400 to 500 million. And in today's market, I think that's even more relevant, given the additional difficulties that we have to bring customers, to the table and to play. So when you're talking of the billions as a return on investment, you're talking years, long time. And that's assuming that, of course, you can bring everything together and you can make your bottom line. But in today's environment, it's asking these very large amounts. I think really the number we've always had is around the 400 to 500 million. Would be an appropriate sized investment. Look, for those sort of money, you still get a very, very good property. You don't necessarily need the 18-hole golf course, that goes with a lot of these large properties. It doesn't drive revenue. It does help, of course. It's an additional tool and toolbox, and we all need that, to give us as much effort as we can. But today, technology also gives us more assistance in terms of what we can do to drive revenue to our businesses. We've got proxy betting, phone betting. We know that's been around a long time, but we know how much revenue it brings to the table. In some cases, some of the properties are at 75% of the revenue is determined by proxy. So, and it's popular in Asia and significant, as we know from the Manila casinos. And what have we seen just recently?
Yeah. Well, we know that the integrated resort model has been hugely successful, as you say, Manila, Philippines, of course, Macau. Let's talk about an ideal scenario where Vietnam was opened up to locals, and we're in I guess it's a better market for large properties like Ho Tram, Hoiana. What sort of potential does the industry have in Vietnam in that scenario? And what sort of GGR nationwide could we be looking at, do you believe?
Look, I think at the moment we're looking at limited, really. We've seen two large properties there struggle. Ho Tram effectively now is a real estate business. It really doesn't have any significant contribution from a gaming position. I'd like to say that Hoiana, wouldn't be in that same box, but it's hard to say it isn't. If we were brutally honest, it looks like it's going to be a real estate development, as it's going to deliver the core revenues for it. The gaming, I can't see how the gaming can. There are other facilities to help it. So
there's a long way to go, I think, before we're going to see the likes of Wynn and larger companies, come into, recognized resort developers come into Vietnam. And until they open up with the non-foreigner model and allow locals, I really don't see that we're going to see any further large investment coming into the country, which is it's sorry to see, because it's such a wonderful country, as we know. And there could be a lot of opportunities there, but the government places a lot of restrictions on companies coming in as foreigners. And it seems to me the message that we've seen now from the Ministry of Finance is where they've identified two large local, groups. That to me is where they will be looking, for development.
Sure.
Why have a foreigner come in where we've got it in our back door?
Exactly. It's a shame, Shaun, because I mean, as you know, you spent a lot of time in Vietnam. It's a beautiful place, great place to visit, great, wonderful people, very friendly people. I mean, from your experiences, what are the competitive advantages that Vietnam does offer?
Well, as a tourist destination, it's a beautiful destination. I mean, and really, I think today's international traveler is not just looking for a gambling experience; they're looking for other experiences to enjoy as well. And certainly, if you were to look at, well, Da Nang for one is a beautiful location. It has everything that an international tourist wants. It's safe. Of course, which is another very important element, when people are making a decision to, to travel. It's cheap, which of course is another, a lot of people look at it as when they're looking at destinational travel. And the casinos that are there were the major ones. They're very well presented, but that's not the end story in my thinking. My thinking is that we have to now offer a lot more than just a gambling experience. We have to offer a much bigger, much broader picture. The industry's changed over the last 20, 30 years, and now gambling, and gaming is as important as it is, and as much as it delivers to the bottom line. As a developer, we have to look a little bit out of the box and see what else we can bring to the overall experience of what the international travelers want. And Vietnam can do that. It has the structure, it has the infrastructure, it has the resources. It really just needs a group, and that can work with a very strong local group, because I think that's the key. And this is where how Tram fell down, where it didn't feel it had the need to have a local partner. The owners at the time thought that they could just come in as a foreign company, and that they had all their tools in their toolbox. Well, they didn't, and you must have a strong local partner, and never more so than in Vietnam. You must have a good partner in Vietnam. Without that, really, you're just not going to succeed.
Sure. So, I mean, as you say, Shaun, the two companies that may be added to the pilot program are locally owned. Just giving your sort of long-term projections and thoughts, I mean, do you think we'll ever see locals gaming in Vietnam sort of opened up more broadly to all of licensed casinos?
I honestly think it's a long way down the track before we see that. There are social evils considered. There's 4 social evils considered in the Vietnamese culture, and gambling is probably the first one, along with drugs, prostitution, the usual suspects. But gambling is considered a social evil, and until the Politburo really comes on, changes its way and changes its thinking, really, I don't think anything's going to happen. We have to look at the structure. The government structure in Vietnam is insofar is that really the Politburo are like the board of directors, and the Prime Minister's office and the other ministries, they're like the executive. They simply follow directions and guidelines from the Politburo. And if the Politburo don't approve and don't give the final sign-off to these sort of recommendations, then nothing's going to happen. And unfortunately, that's the case with Vietnam. And unfortunately, a lot of people don't actually realize that is the story. That the Politburo rule, the Prime Minister's office, as powerful as he is not as powerful as what goes on in the Politburo. And there's a lot of anti-gambling people in the Politburo.
Well, I guess we can only hope that things might change a little bit in the future, Shaun. Mate, great to talk to you. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you so much. Well, so I would welcome the opportunity to return, as we all would.
Yeah,
But I think that and it's good to see the country opening up. I mean, it's great to see, and I'm very positive on Vietnam. You know, I think it's a great location, but you have to understand the challenges of going into that particular market. It's incredibly difficult, and you have to go in with eyes wide open and with a very good partner.
find a good partner. Thanks, Shaun. Great to talk to you. And once again, everybody, we'll see you on the next edition of Trade Talk.
Thank you very much.